Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about the Swamp Fox News that began in 1970. The Swamp Fox, imagine that, Donald Trump. You see, President Trump, the swamp draining began in the Empire up at Glens Falls back in the 1920s and the 1880s, the old swamp draining. You need to understand, President Donald Trump, that today the American people want to know why the Bushes and the Clintons and all of their little partners in crime are still walking free. Now, I don't want to get off today into the discussion of the shin plasters of the Empire State. We won't talk about the shin plaster today, which is a huge sign of how people have been massively lied to in America. But we're going to talk specifically about how corrupt the swamp of the court system is. Now, there's a former federal judge and quite a few others. I'm not going to start throwing names out, but there's other people that realize that the court system is a great big huge racket. You've got presidential buddies, personal friends, and political contributors to presidents that get appointed to the federal bench for life. So what you've got is an unelected, appointed group of presidential pals that pull all the strings in the American judicial system. Now, I want to remind everybody that this judicial system is running on shin plaster in the empirical state of America. The shin plasters are running the show. And Jeff Sessions and Christopher Wray and Vice President Pence and Mr. Donald Trump, that's just the fact of the matter. Shin plaster. This bills of credit, Federal Reserve note, fiat script. Because they took all the real money right after they murdered John Kennedy in Dallas, when they enacted the Coinage Act of 1965. But that's a topic, a whole other series of videos on the fake fiat script, the shin plaster that America's running on right now, Donald J. Trump. But let's get back to the Swamp Fox. You see, Donald Trump, this boy right here, I grew up at the swamp. I lived on the swamp, and my mother and father built the swamp back in the 1960s at Harris Bay. The southern leg, as it was known, of Kenneth Hart's Middle Bay, today known as Harris Bay in Queensbury, New York. The site of the Mill Pond on Lake George, the old Mill Pond. Now, I want to shift gears here just a little bit, and I want to give a shout out to the Lake George Park Commission, the Empire State's Department of Environmental Confiscation. They confiscate private property by environmental legislation, environmental land use and planning and zoning controls, and then they confiscate real estate like they've done for 500 years there in New York, since the days of New Netherlands and New France and New England and the New Americas. The confiscation of real estate in the empire began back in the late 1500s and the early 1600s by the grand old Albany Corporation, They're next to Beaverwick and Van Rensselaerwick by the patroons of the Dutch and the English crowns, which, just by the chance, they installed the dam A on John Stoughton's land patent at Ticonderoga, New York. The land patent of the English crown, Buckingham Palace, Balmoral Castle. They gave to a lot of their buddies, their royal butties, they gave huge amounts of land via patent and grant. The problem is that the royals didn't own the land. They stole it all. You can't give away what you don't own because you took it illegally. The invasion of the Americas by the royals of Europe is nothing but a big crime scene. Now there's your swamp, Donald J. Trump, and Hillary Rodham Clinton, and Billy Bob Blowjob, and the Bushes, and Christopher Wray, and Jeff Sessions, and Vice President Pence, and the whole gang. This giant, unlawful, barbaric, and savage invasion of what's today known as North America is nothing but a giant crime scene. And yes, that's going out to my friends with the First Nations Council of Tribes. You got to stop and understand something, Mr. Trump. Swamp draining, are you sure you want to take issue with the son of the swamp fox, on swamp draining? Because I'm going to tell you what, Donald Trump, we're going to put some fuel on the fire. Right here, right now. My father was a Navy aviator. My father was a United States Navy carrier pilot, a fighter pilot, in the Pacific Fleet during the Second World War. And up there in the old Empire State, they used their damned Dam A on the mill pond to manipulate the water levels in the wintertime. Up and down, up and down, up and down with the old water on Lake George, New York. Not Old York, not Old England, New England, New York, at Ticonderoga. Very specifically at Weedville, at the top of the Lachute River, which was known at the time as the Upper Privilege. The Upper Privilege, the Upper Falls, where they built Judge Isaac Kellogg's first dams. And then, of course, International Paper Corporation, your big Federal Reserve pack of butties from the Glens Falls banks, went on to build what's today known as Dam number 230 on the Upper Falls, where Lake George drains into the Lachute River. Ladies and gentlemen, stealing land, destroying environment, poisoning rivers, poisoning lakes, and poisoning the oceans. This is what the American government has been doing for centuries. The Hudson River, Donald J. Trump, is nothing but a great big huge sewer. It's an open sewer. Just like the Hudson Champlain Canal that runs over to Lake Champlain. Just exactly like the Lachute River, where Lake George practices dilution is the solution to pollution. You see, in the wintertime they draw that lake down. Ask the executive director of the Lake George Park Commission, David Wick, and Chief head administrator of their environmental operations division, Roger Smith. In the wintertime, they do the Lake George drawdown, where they funnel a lot of water to the electrical generation companies there in Ticonderoga. International Paper and Power Corporation, later to become Enel Power, and Systems Properties, and I think today it's called Green Mountain Power, all owned by a consortium of investors from Europe. From Europe, imagine that. But yes, the wintertime drawdown, where they drop the lake and make as much room as possible for fresh water in the spring, so that they can dilute the pollution and come up with a solution to the declining waters of the pristine, ho, 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 ha, 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 the pristine, not waters of Lake George, New York. So all the residents of Billionaires Row, up north of Lake George Village and over around Pilot Knob, and at the Lake George Association, can continue to tout Lake George as the queen of American tourist traps. Lake George, New York is an open sewer. You see, 242 square miles of Lake George watershed. The Lake George Basin is all bedrock. It's all bedrock, and every bit of the sewage from all that pizza and beer that they sell for lots of money around Lake George, all of the pee-pee and the poo-poo goes into the septic fields and the septic tanks. The brownfields, there's thousands of brownfields all around Lake George, New York, and it all leaches into the lake. Lots more sewage and leachate are in the lake than road salt. And that's for the head lawyer, the chief counsel of the Lake George Fund, Tom West, and the people there in Queensbury. All of that sewage from all those septic tanks, every time it rains, leaches its way into the lake. And that's why the Lake George Park Commission and the Department of Environmental Confiscation have to flush the lake every winter. Because dilution is the solution to pollution. So yes, Donald J. Trump. Let's talk about the swamp. Let's talk about the old Swamp Fox News. Fox News, imagine that. The Swamp Fox News began in 1970 on Ogden Street in Glens Falls, New York, and up at Diamond Point, where Rachel Ray grew up. Everybody knows Rachel Ray. She used to ride my school bus, as a little sidebar there. The swamp, Donald J. Trump. The swamp is all the shin plaster, and the shin plaster is all the swamp. And that's why you got all these presidential butties anointed and appointed to sit on federal courts and to deny citizens their constitutional human rights. To deny to American people their constitutional rights. And if you think I'm fooling around, start taking a look at what Judge Richard Posner is touting these days on how American citizens are treated like trash when they file their lawsuits in the federal courts. And then, if you go on and look at the numbers of cases in the Supreme Court that are just thrown in the dumpster every year, they've got this sophistry. It's a big sophism. It's a lie. They got too many cases and not enough resources, so they only hear 80 cases a year, and the rest of them are thrown away. It's like going to a big concert with 60,000 people standing in line and telling people, well, we're only going to let in 100 or so, and the rest of your tickets are no good. You got to go home. Your standing in line is a waste of time. The United States Supreme Court's a big scam. It's a big huckster, shuckster, swindle, and racketeering enterprise. 99.2% of the cases are thrown in the dumpster every year. And then they reset the clock and they go again the next year. Because they don't have the time and they don't have the money. They got trillions of dollars for everything else. Well, I take that back. They got unlimited amounts of printed up Imagineered shin plaster. They got all kind of Federal Reserve notes and Federal Reserve credit for every damn other thing. Massive military budgets, foreign aid. They lavish themselves with large amounts of shin plaster that they print up right out of the thin freaking air every year. But the United States Supreme Court racket doesn't have enough money. What a freaking swindle. Judge Richard Posner, you're absolutely correct. What a scam. You see, the old swamp fox here has been studying this stuff. He's been taking a long, hard, close look at the old shake and the shimmy of this United States of America Incorporated. The bankrupt mafia on the Potomac River. There at Daniel Carroll's farm. Rome on the Tiber River. They used to call the little river that ran up to where they built that swamp, Washington, D.C., where they built the swamp. That used to be the Tiber River, and they used to refer to it as Rome. Rome and Daniel Carroll's farm. Yep, old Witham, he's been studying a little bit of that history for quite a while. These books are not just for show. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Richard Posner, President Donald Trump. Why are the Clintons still walking free? Why are the Bushes still getting their retirement checks and living in the lap of luxury? Why is this country so off the rails and mired in this giant joke that Jimmy Comey and Robert Mueller are perpetrating against the American people? They're controlling the discussion. Oh, it's a great big, they spied on Donald Trump. Oh, there's a national freaking disaster. That's a national emergency. Donald Trump got spied on. Spygate. Oh, my Lord Almighty. They're controlling the national discussion with their Imagineered, trumped up, fake political scandals. It never ends. Ask Trey Gowdy. Ask Trey Gowdy. How they cook up all this nonsense to keep people amused and distracted. I'm going to sum this one up.